It was a sweltering afternoon, the kind where the heat settled thickly over everything, making even the air appear lazy. Cole had just returned from his daily run, his shirt drenched in sweat, clinging to his toned chest as he fumbled for his keys at the door. That's when he noticed her. Annabelle, his neighbor, sitting on her porch, fanning herself lazily with a glass of iced tea in her hand. She was always so put together, even in the oppressive heat. Her sundress was light and airy. Her black hair was loosely tied up, but a few strands fell down her hot cheeks. She gave him a short glance, her eyes lingering a little too long on his gleaming skin, before she laughed and took a lengthy sip from her glass. Quite a workout. Her voice was quiet and sexy, with a hint of teasing. There was something in the way she looked at him that he hadn't noticed before. Cole paused, wiping perspiration from his brow and giving her a little. "Yeah, it's nasty out there," he muttered. Trying to keep his tone casual, there was no denying the way his heart raced beneath her stare. He had always thought of her as the lovely older woman next door. But now something was different. The air between them seemed charged, even electric. Annabelle slowly rose up, tightening the strap of her sundress that had dropped down her shoulder nicely, appeared to manage. "It was all right," she murmured, her gaze never leaving his. "Leaving his care for a drink? You look like you could use one." Cole hesitated for a moment, but the invitation mixed with the way she was looking at him was too tempting to resist. He nodded, stepping closer as she waved him over, her lips curving into a knowing smile. He followed her inside, the cool air from the house hitting him like a relief from the heat, but the tension between them only seemed to grow stronger. The living room was dimly lit, cozy in a way that made him suddenly very aware of the fact that they were alone. Annabelle handed him a glass of iced tea, her fingers brushing against his as she did, the touch lingering, sending a shiver through to him. "You've grown up quite a bit since you moved in next door," she said, her voice low, almost purring, as she took a seat on the couch, crossing her legs slowly. The movement drew his eyes to the soft curve of her thighs, peeking out from beneath the hem of her dress. She noticed, of course, and smiled in a way that made his pulse quicken. Cole swallowed hard, trying to keep his cool. "Yeah, I guess I have," he replied. Annabelle leaned in slightly, her fingers grazing his knee, lingering there as her eyes searched his face. "I am curious as to whether you ever tire of being the good boy next door, as you have consistently been so polite." Cole's heart pounded in his chest at the weight of her touch. As she inched closer, her hand teasingly grazed the inside of Cole's. The tension between them was undeniable now, a steady hum that filled the room thick with anticipation. She leaned in, her lips just a whisper away from his. "You don't have to be shy with me." "Cole," she muttered, her breath heated. Cole's pulse quickened his skin, and "I can see it in your eyes." The chilly air inside the home suddenly felt oppressive, as if the walls were closing in on them, magnifying every beat of his beating pulse that he desired. He had always noticed and appreciated her. Annabelle pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, her fingers still resting on his thigh, her thumb tracing slow, tantalizing circles on his skin. She smiled softly, but there was a hunger in her eyes, one that mirrored his own. "You don't have to pretend, Cole. I know you've considered it." Her voice was low and enticing. Cole gulped hard, his mouth suddenly dry as his gaze flicked from her lips to her eyes and back again. He couldn't deny it any longer, so he nodded, barely managing to form words. Above a whisper, her smile widened, and she shifted even closer, her knee brushing against his. "Good," she whispered, her lips grazing his jaw as she spoke, "because I've thought about you too." Before he could respond, she closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a slow, deliberate kiss. It was soft at first, testing and teasing, but as soon as Cole responded, it deepened, quickly becoming more urgent and heated. Her hand moved higher up his, the touch more insistent. just as much as Cole's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, his fingers gripping the soft fabric of her sundress. As their bodies pressed together, the kiss intensified, their mouths moving in sync as if they had done this 100 times before. Annabelle's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him even closer to her, breath hitching slightly as his hands slid up her sides, his touch firmer now, more confident. She pulled away just long enough to catch her breath and her eyes. She muttered, her voice breathy and full of longing. Cole's heart pounded, his thoughts spinning as he comprehended her words. And rough, filled with the same need that was coursing through him, he leaned in, capturing her lips once more in a kiss that was even more heated, more urgent than the last. Annabelle moaned softly against his lips, her hands roaming his chest. Feeling the firm muscles beneath his shirt, Cole could feel her body melting into his, her curves, pressing against him as their kiss deepened, her nails lightly scraping his skin, making him shiver with anticipation. Her hands slid down to the hem of his shirt, tugging it upward as her fingers grazed the bare skin of his stomach. Cole broke the kiss just long enough to pull his shirt over his head, tossing it aside before his hands returned to her, slipping under the thin, fat fabric of her dress. His fingers explored the smooth skin of her back, tracing every curve and every dip as he pulled her even closer. Annabelle's breath caught as he pulled her closer, their bodies flush against each other, their heartbeats syncing in rhythm with a playful glint in his eyes. Cole lifted her slightly, adjusting her position so that she straddled him on the couch. This sudden closeness sent a jolt of electricity through them both, their bodies aligning perfectly. He could feel the heat radiating from her core, and it drove him wild with desire. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice a husky whisper filled with yearning as he gazed up at her, searching her eyes for reassurance. Annabelle nodded, a sultry smile playing on her lips. "More than okay," she replied, her fingers moving down to his chest, tracing the outline of his muscles, savoring the feel of him beneath her hands, continuing their journey exploring the firm contours of his body, lingering at his sides, her fingertips lightly grazing his ribs, teasingly close to where he wanted her to touch most. Cole let out a low growl of desire as she caressed his chest, the heat pulling in his stomach as he lifted her even closer, their bodies perfectly aligned. He could feel the softness of her legs against his, her bare thighs pressing against his hips, igniting a craving deep within him. He murmured, "God, you are beautiful," and his lips reconnected with hers in a passionate kiss. Their mouths moved in unison with a sense of urgency that left them both breathless. Cole's hands found their way to her thighs, gripping them firmly as he pulled her closer, feeling the weight of her body against him, every inch of her pressing into him as their kiss deepened. Annabelle's hands slid down to his waist, her fingers curling around the waistband of his shorts, teasingly brushing against the fabric. Cole shuddered at the sensation, the anticipation building with every light touch. She leaned back slightly, her eyes dark with desire as she met his gaze. "Don't be shy now," she teased her, voice sultry as she bit her lip, giving him a playful wink. I want to feel all of the heat of her words ignite something primal within him, and with a swift motion he grasped her waist, guiding her to grind against him. The friction sent shock waves through both of them, and they gasped in unison as pleasure coursed through their bodies. Cole's hands tightened on her hips, guiding her movements as they found a rhythm together. "Just like that," he whispered, his voice thick with need as he watched her. She was intoxicating in the way she moved her body, arching her lips and separating them in soft moans. Each glance and caress drew them closer to the brink of intimacy. Miss Annabelle leaned down, capturing his lips again, her hands roaming over his chest down to his abs, feeling the way he tensed under her touch. She was in control, teasing him as Beck. She kissed him deeply, her tongue brushing against his, igniting a fire in his veins as she pulled back. She bit her lip, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I've always wanted to be close to you like this," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you'd feel the same." "Believe me," Cole replied, his gaze intense. "I've thought about this way more than I should have." He shifted again, this time lying her back against the couch, his body hovering over hers as he leaned down, kissing his way across her chest, his lips trailing down to the soft skin of her. Feeling of her legs wrapping around his waist made him groan with need, and he reveled in the way she reacted to every touch, every kiss. Cole's hands moved higher again, exploring every curve of her body and feeling the softness of her skin beneath his fingers. He could hardly believe they were here, lost in each other, their bodies entwined in a dance of desire. Each moment was electric, filled with a passion that was undeniable, each caress igniting a fire within them that burned brighter with every heartbeat. As Cole kissed his way back up, he let his hands glide along the silky skin of her thighs, feeling the heat radiating from her as her legs wrapped around him, pulling him even closer. He captured her lips again, their mouths moving in a passionate dance, tongues brushing against each other, igniting flames of desire that coursed through both of them. Annabelle's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him deeper into the kiss as her hands explored the contours of his chest, tracing the firm muscles beneath his skin. "You feel so good," she whispered, breathlessly against his lips, her breath hot and inviting. "Not as lovely as you," he replied, his voice thick with longing as he kissed a path down her neck, savoring the delicate curve of her collarbone. His hands slid up her sides, his fingers grazing the soft swell of her breasts, sending shivers of pleasure through her. "Cole," she breathed, arching her back as he captured one of her nipples between his fingers, teasing it gently as he kissed lower, his mouth exploring the tender flesh of her hips. The world around them faded, leaving only the intoxicating connection they shared, their bodies moving in perfect harmony, every touch igniting a fire that seemed to consume them. Both she pulled him back up with her eyes, dark with desire as she captured his lips again, then whispering, "Let's not hold back anymore." With a shared understanding, they melted into each other's bodies, intertwined, hearts racing in unison as their kisses grew more fervent. Every caress ignited the air around them, a promise of what was to come in that moment. Nothing else mattered. They were lost in their own world, consumed by a passion that had finally found its release. And as they held each other tightly, the warmth of their bodies mingling, they knew this was just the beginning of something beautiful, something they would never want to end.